Welcome to KDO Studios. Today we're going to explore lace basics. My name is Tracy and I love working with lace. What is lace? Lace knitting is a style of knitting characterized by stable holes in the fabric arranged with consideration of aesthetic value. Lace is sometimes considered the pinnacle of knitting because of its complexity and because woven fabrics cannot easily be made to have holes. A garment can be made entirely out of lace, like this cowl, or it can have a lace accent like this shawl. In the 1800s, a woman could support her family by creating and selling delicate lace. Shawls, scarves, and altar cloths were made for the church. The richer women could make lace to show off at parties and weddings. The most famous of this lace is the wedding ring shawl. You can see a wedding ring can be moved along the shawl, and it was known because this is made from the hair of goats. It is the finest hair and it's gossamer weight, and it would take hours and hours of work. Lace is defined as open work, which was comprised of a few holes, or knitted lace, which had many holes, like this shawl. Simple lace is yarn overs and decreases paired next to one another, like this shawl. Most of the ancient lace patterns were simple lace. They had yarn overs, left and right decreases, and knit and purl stitches. The three main ancient lace traditions are Orenburg, which is in Russia, Estonia, which was part of Russia and they are now ruling themselves, and the Shetland Islands in Scotland. Each of them have their own traditional lace motifs that were passed down from generation to generation. Decorative lace is the lace we're most common with, that has holes on one side and then has a resting row on the other, although not all lace is like that. Another type of lace is called faggoting, and these are vertical holes that go up and down the fabric, and you can use it for mesh, you can use it for nice open work. It really provides a really wonderful fabric for drape and movement. And then we have the horizontal holes, which are called eyelets, and you use these for booties or cinching up anything from sleeves to necklines to waist lines. Anything you want, you weave something through the holes and you can pull it tight using those. Now we're going to talk a little bit about bias. Bias is the slant that is caused by manipulating the fabric with yarn overs and knit two togethers and their placement. It's my favorite part of the class because this is how you make all those wonderful curves and shapes and all the things that make lace so amazing. Now this one, our decreases are here and our increases are here, and you can see there is no difference to the fabric on either side of the yarn overs. In this sample, the yarn overs are on the right side, the decreases are in the middle, and you can see the shape has changed. There's a slant now to the fabric, and it behaves much differently. In this sample, the yarn overs are on one side and the decreases are on the other, and I couldn't block this back into a square. It wants to be a rhombus, and that's because of the slant. Look at all the amazing things and shapes that you can make by having your decreases are in the center, your increases are around them, and they're staggered. And this is a double decrease, and these are single increases. And it's just amazing what you can do with bias. Now we're going to talk a bit about yarn. The ancient lace was made on gossamer, which, as you can see, is really thin. This is what is considered lace weight today, which is a little thicker. And here is a fingering, which most lace weight, what people consider lace weight now, is fingering or sock weight yarn. But you can make lace on chunky or anything really. So it's not limited by the yarn. So let's talk about needles. For actual ancient lace, you would probably use one of these. This is a 000. Now, the important thing about your needles is that it's the needle for the size of the yarn and that it has a point. When you do a lot of lace, you just need a pointed needle so that you can manipulate it well. You need to be able to get in those knit two togethers and pass stitches over, and so I would suggest just having a needle with a good point that works with whatever yarn from chunky to gossamer that you use. Another tool you'll be using is stitch markers. Stitch markers can show you your repeat, so you know how many stitches are in your repeat and you can keep track of your knitting, and they can show you which side of your knitting is the front. I always put a stitch marker in the front for that. Locking stitch markers can be put in if a stitch drops or something. They're amazing to use. So now we're going to talk about your style. I am what's called an English knitter. I knit with the yarn in my right hand. I'm a thrower. I throw the yarn. And then some people, and I'm not good with this, so I will do my best. Some people are continental, which means they hold the yarn in their left hand and they pick the stitches up. But what's important is this. This is your tension, and this is what will keep your stitches even. If you're pulling too much on the working yarn, then it's going to tighten everything up. If you're, I don't even know if I can do it, make it all loose, then the stitches will be looser. So good tension is the most important thing. It doesn't matter if you're continental or English, it doesn't matter if you're combination, anyone can knit lace. You just have to watch your stitches and your tension, the amount of tug you put on this, and that will give you gauge, and that will shape your entire piece. So whatever you do, do it consistently. And if you have bad tension, it'll get better as you go. It'll even itself out, I promise. So now we're going to talk about the cast on. The cast on is the foundation of your lace, and different cast on are better for lace than others. The long tail cast on makes a nice edge. It's good for scarves. It's a good edge for something that you don't have to aggressively block. And I grab the yarn like this, go through that strand and yarn over. This is the way my mom taught me, and I know there's other ways. I like to do it this way because it's a bit of mom, and she's the one that taught me how to knit. So this is a nice edge. It doesn't stretch a lot, but like I said, it's good for most edges on a shawl. The one that I really like is the cable cast on. The cable cast on, you start with a knit on stitch. So you just knit a stitch and put it back on the needle instead of having it on your right hand needle. But for the cable cast on, you go in between the first and second stitches, and then you put that stitch on the needle. And what this does It allows you to snug it up as you go. It also goes around this piece of yarn, which gives it more of a stretch. And some things need to be aggressively blocked, so they need more stretch, because you don't want a bound line stopping it from stretching, and you can see how stretchy that is. It also makes a rolled edging that's really pretty and decorative. The third way to cast on is with a crochet needle. So you put your slip stitch on the crochet needle, and you hold your other knitting needle side by side, just like crochet and knitting are side by side crafts, and you yarn over. The first stitch you're going to have to hold on to everything because it's a little fiddly to get it through that hole, but see, it puts a stitch on the working needle, and you just keep doing that, and it does get easier, and there is no crochet necessary to do this, but it's also nice for crocheters who want to have a crochet cast on bind off. And I did this one a little loosey, but it's a nice edge. It has a nice give, and it looks just like knitting. So those are 3 ways to cast on. Okay, now we're going to talk about some tips and tricks that just help with lace knitting. And the first is the Lifeline. You take a piece of yarn that is thinner than the yarn you're using, and I like to use cotton because it slides and it doesn't attach itself. Sometimes wool will actually felt into the fabric, and that's can be dangerous to your knitting. And you just go through each stitch, skipping the marker. Now the thing about lifelines is you have to put them in before you need them. So when you finish a repeat and it looks amazing and you think it's perfect, then that's when you put in your lifeline. And then if there's a problem, you can rip back to it. So a lifeline is like a save function on a computer. Oh dear. Now, of course, my markers are going to drop, but my knitting is all intact. You just pick up each stitch, and you don't want to get the lifeline when you pick them up. Don't split it. That's why cotton isn't slitty. But all my stitches are here. It doesn't matter if they were a yarn over or knit 2 together. They're all on the lifeline. And I need to put that other marker in the middle at some point, but that's okay. So there you go. Back on the needles. Crisis averted. So a lifeline will save you lots and lots of trouble. So now we're going to talk about yarn placement. When you knit, your yarn is in the back. And when you purl, your yarn is in the front. But if you forget and make that next stitch, it makes a yarn over, it makes a hole. So just remember where you are, how to read your stitches, and then you won't have to worry about yarn overs in your work. But we'll talk about how to get rid of them in a minute. Another thing I wanted to share, because my students showed me this, is some people pull the yarn around to the back before they start, and that makes an extra stitch. So I have this marker here. I know there's 2 stitches. I'm going to pull that back down so that you can see I'm not splitting and creating a new stitch. But that's another way you can add a stitch when you're knitting without even thinking about it. Now we're going to talk about charts. Charts are very important to lace knitting because most patterns will be just represented as a chart. You might find some that have written, but mostly this is what you'll see. And this is an example of this swatch that we looked at before. So each square represents a stitch. If it's a double decrease, that'll just be one square. And then hopefully there'll be 2 increases to make up for the loss of the 2 stitches. So if we go to the legend, it shows us what each stitch is for. The squares are knit stitches on the right side, and on the wrong side, they're purl stitches. This is a yarn over, and this is a knit 2 together. When we look at this chart, we can tell that it's flat knitting because it goes from the right side to the left side, back to the right side, just like when you turn your needle. If it were in the round knitting, all the numbers would be on the right side, since you never turn your needle. So you can see we have a bunch of knits, a yarn over, and then a knit 2 together. This is one increase, and this is one decrease. So they cancel each other out, and no time does this pattern go over 20 stitches. The wrong side rows are resting rows. They're just a purl row so that the yarn can rest. And it makes it easy. It's nice and relaxing to have that row on the other side. So this was a simple chart. Let's look at a more complicated chart. And this is what we're going to be working on today, diamond lace. Again, we can see that this is knit flat because it goes back and forth. We can see that each square represents something, and we have something different here. We have this stitch, which is an SSK, and we have this stitch, which is an SK2P. And we'll talk about those stitches later. But again, we have a decrease next to an increase. We have a double decrease next to 2 increases, and no time does it go over the 8 stitches. This also has a red box around it, which is a repeat. So if you were looking at a written, these would be your asterisks that said repeat what's in between these until the last stitch. This is the extra stitch. So this is a pattern of 8 plus 1. So if you were to make this, you would cast on in numbers of 8 and add 1, and you could make a beautiful pattern like this. Okay, so let's look at some stitches and let's work some lace. I have a 2-stitch selvage row here just so this won't curl uncontrollably, and it's not in the pattern. If it was something that was supposed to be in the pattern, there would be a note that would say 2 knits on each side for selvage. It'd just be a little asterisk at the bottom. Okay, so where we are, learning to read your knitting is very important. So I am 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I am on row 9. Knit 2. Now a yarn over is just bringing the yarn to the front. It's called a yarn forward in England, which makes more sense to me, but it's just bringing the yarn to the front and then doing the next stitch, which is an SSK. So we're going to slip, slip, and then put this needle through the front, yarn over, and make the stitch. Now I want to show you how to undo this stitch And it's not as easy because we twisted the stitches, but you go from behind, you grab those 2 stitches. Now see how they're twisted. So you go through the back and untwist them and then put them back on the needle. So let's make that SSK again, now that I've showed you how to undo it. Let's look back at our chart. Knit 1, and now we're going to do a knit 2 together. Nope, I was doing an SSK, just seeing if you were paying attention. Okay, so a knit 2 together is going through both stitches knitwise at the same time. And this one is easy to undo, and it follows the rule of tinking. You just grab those 2 stitches and undo it. So let's knit that again, and they're in the right position because we didn't twist anything. And then yarn over, knit 1, yarn over, knit 1. Now my marker goes on because I dropped it previously, and we're going to do that again. So knit 2, yarn over, SSK, knit 1, knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 1, and we have come to the end of our repeat, so we have the last stitch, which is a knit, and then I have my 2 selvage stitches. And that is row 9. Okay, now we're going to do row 11. I already did that purl row, so you didn't have to sit there through it. Okay, so 1, 2, 3 knits. So let me do my 2 stitches of selvage. And 1, 2, 3 knits. Now we have a yarn over, SK2P yarn over. So I'm going to bring the yarn to the front, I'm going to slip the first stitch purlwise, I'm going to knit 2 together, and I'm going to pass that stitch over, and that is a double decrease. Now if you need to undo this, because you did it in the wrong place, you've got to undo it the way you made it. So you bring that stitch back over, and then we have a knit 2 together, just like we had before, and then you just slide him back. So let's do that again. We slip the first stitch purlwise, knit 2 together, and pass the slip stitch over. And then we're going to yarn over, and we have 2 knits. And that's what I've got there in my repeat, so everything's looking good. Let's do that again. 1, 2, 3, yarn to the front, slip the stitch, knit 2 together, pass the stitch over. Now I am going to forget to knit my yarn over that goes here, and I know I'm doing it. Okay, so 1, 2, and there's our last stitch. So this time we're just going to purl a little bit. Now, my yarn over is here, so my yarn over goes here. And this is where you could use a locking stitch marker. You could put it on after the fact just to show, but we know that it's 1, 2, 3 stitches after we have our selvage. We're going to be purling, yarn to the front. So 1, 2, 3. Now, you want to pick up this bar and put it on the needle so that the right leg, so you can see the left leg is back there, the right leg is in front. And then you just purl it and keep going. And you have put that pearl back on your needle. So you can pick up anything on the purling side. If you want to undo stitches, you go from the front to the back, front to the back. Say you didn't want this purl, you just drop him off the needle. So you can pick him up, you can move him, you can do anything on the purl side, you can fix anything. You just have to be able to read your knitting and know where you are and take it one stitch at a time. Okay, so your project is ready now to be bound off, and we're going to look at the 3 ways to bind off to match the 3 ways that we cast on. And the first one is the basic bind off. So you knit 2 stitches and then you pass that first stitch over the second stitch. I'll do that again, but everyone pretty much knows how to do this, I think. And you want to give it a little tug. You want to make it loose. You don't want it tight. That's one of the things about this bind off. It can be super tight. So if you just give it a little tug, see those stitches are nice. They look very flat. Nothing's pulled in. Everything still is stretchy. So if you just do that, then it works really nice. Now, if you want to do the cable bind off, then you would get 1 stitch that you would knit and put it back on your needle and then knit through the back of both the stitches. Now what this does is just like with the cable, it gives that little bit of extra to go around. So you put it back on the needle and knit through the back 2 stitches. And again, you have a nice stretchy bind off. And they all kind of look the same, you know. Now, if we wanted to do crochet, this is a purl row, so normally you would go through purlwise. If you were on a knit row, you could go through knitwise. You can choose what you want to do. I'm just gonna, because this is a yarn over, and it's kind of fuddly. So you just go through like you're knitting a stitch, and you grab the yarn, pull it through, and then pull it through again. And again, don't be too tight. The whole thing is you want to be able to have that stretch. And see, the crochet looks just like the knitting. In fact, you can't tell the difference between the 3 techniques when you look, but each of them is different, and you have to find which one you like. But my favorite is the cable cast off. So before you put in those ends, you need to block. And you can see my poor little sample. He is sad. He is curling in on himself, and this is pure wool. So what we're going to do is look at a bunch of different ways to block him. Now, I have a lot of tools of the trade. This is a blocking wire, and you can go through that top row. And why would you use this? You would use this if you wanted a shawl edge to be straight, which I will show you in 1 second. See this? This I blocked on all the sides, and you can see it's totally straight. It kept its shape, and this is what blocking does. With wool, it breaks down the fibers and forms them in a different direction. So I know this is a huge wire for this little guy, but what you would do is you would have some pins and you would choose which ones you thought were best for the job. And then you would know that that line would be super straight. Now, there is a tool that I like also for making edges, and this is from Knitter's Pride. I think other people have them, but that will also help make a really straight line. Or you can pin in a straight line. You can get blocking boards with rulers on them so that you can pin straight. So you get the idea. Basically, all the stitches are now presenting themselves straight, and what's going to change that is getting it wet. So, yes. And you don't want to felt anything by roughing it up, but just make sure the water's in there, and then you want to take a damp towel and get rid of the excess. You want to make sure that, you didn't poke it through. Now it's wet, and then you would let it dry. And when it dries, it will stay flat. Flatter, This probably needs to be aggressively blocked because this is wool. And what happens with wool is there are fibers, and when you wet it, they open up, and then when they close again, they close in that same position that you let them go. And different fibers block differently. For instance, this is a plant. This is a cotton, so this you would want to be gentle with because plant fibers, except for linen, will all stretch and overstretch, and you want to be really careful about that. And so there are different methods of wet blocking. You can wet everything first and then pin it. We can do what we did. This is spray blocking. You can get a steamer and steam block, or you can use the setting on your iron. But you just want to be really careful. You don't want to put the iron on the wool. You just want to steam it just a little bit. But I would recommend probably this method or wetting it first for wools. And alpaca you have to be delicate with. So you really want to make a swatch of what you're working with, in your lace, and then block your little swatch and see how it turns out, so that you can determine what is the best course of action for blocking it. But blocking is so important. So if you make a piece of lace and it's all crumpled up, just block it, and it will bloom and be beautiful and show all those beautiful stitches. So your project is all done now, and you just need to put in all those ends. So I have a contrasting color so I can show you. You want to follow the path of the yarn. So you have to find where the yarn is. And I'm splitting the stitches. So that the yarn remains on top and doesn't get seen. Now here's this. So he goes down into this one. And if this were the same color, you wouldn't see this at all. It's sometimes hard to split them, and this is acrylic, so it's actually not made in the same kind of plies that your wool would be made. Here's that smile. And we're gonna split him. And so you just keep doing that. If you have it in a section like this where there is a lot of stockinette stitch, then it's easy to do that. And you can see, you can't see it, except that is my yarn I'm holding. And if it was the same color, you wouldn't see it at all. So if we were unfortunately, over here. Like say your end was here. Then you would follow this pathway and you would go through this rope just a little. See, he's going to go under here, come out over here. Let's try to split that. Sorry about that. That is my other end. But you can see we're following it. And then you just have to keep on following the path. And actually, he took us over here to an area where we could do something now. But you can go all the way around the holes, and you can see that if this were the same color, you wouldn't be able to see it. If you have a different color because your yarn is changing colors, then I would suggest putting it over here as soon as you can. But if you split it on the back, you should be able to go around those holes without covering them up, and no one will ever know.